Hi, my friends. We are moving on to our final chapter for the week, which is chapter 9. This is a pretty short chapter, and there are a couple of close read questions today, more than we would usually have. So typically we have like 1 or 2 questions. Today we are going to have 3 close read questions. And what I'd like you to do while you're listening to this chapter and thinking about chapter 8, which you just listened to yesterday, is that close read questions for today you can draw evidence from chapters 8 and 9 to answer them. And what I want you to be thinking about is not only what is explicitly said verbally, but how the author describes through Ben, like his body language, anything talking about like how he has that physical reaction to something going on, the thoughts that he's having, maybe the tones of his voice, those kind of things. I want you to be considering all of that while you're thinking about how to answer those questions for today's close read questions. If you're following along with me with the physical copy, we are starting on page 102. If you are using the digital copy online, you would want to log onto your Launchpad, click the Pearson link. You're going to select Unit 1 and the Night of the Spadefoot Toads. When the table of contents pulls up, you're going to want to select Chapter 9, and it will bring you right to where we are. It's really glitchy if you scroll to the page that I mentioned, just because it's so much data for the computer to get to. I know last week I heard a few students saying it was really hard to scroll, so make sure that you are using that resource to get you there quicker and a little bit more or less painfully. All right. The next day in class, Ben can barely look up at Mrs. Tibbets. He slumps down in his seat thinking about the snakes. He knows the snakes don't ordinarily strike people, at least if people leave them alone, but he can't help picturing them gliding out of the cage, lurking in the garden, ready to strike out if someone passes by. Someone like Mrs. Tibbets. He sits up straight and tries to concentrate on the class discussion, but he can't get those 2 triangular heads out of his mind. When Ben gets home, he has a snack and then goes to his room and shuts the door. He doesn't know what else to do but work on his homework. He stares at his geography assignment. An outline of the report is due tomorrow, but Ben hasn't been able to get started on it. Now it's the last thing he wants to do. The desert seems 1,000,000 miles away. The phone rings. Ben runs into the hall and answers it. Ben, this is Mrs. Tibbets. Ben is too stunned to speak. He stares at the wall. Ben? Oh, right. Hi. I need to ask you something. Okay, Ben's heart is racing. When you came by yesterday afternoon, did you notice anything about the cage behind my garage? What? Ben is fighting for time. The cage behind my garage, the one under the lean-to? Now Ben's mind is racing too. He knows he should confess, but he just can't. No, I didn't notice anything. Well, someone apparently opened the cage and then fastened it shut again. She stops talking for a moment, leaving space for him to say something if he wants to. Ben, the snakes in that cage are dangerous. Somehow they got out. Wow. Ben's voice is barely above a whisper. He feels terrible about the lie. He can't bring himself to explain everything to her. What kind of snakes were they, he asks. Rattlesnakes, timber rattlers. That's why I asked you to stay away from them. Rattlesnakes? Ben tries to sound surprised. Yes, I thought maybe you were looking at them when you were here. No, Ben says. Oh, this is horrible. I shouldn't have kept them. Where did you get them? Ben tries to sound like he's just interested and doesn't know anything about them. They're very rare around here, Mrs. Tippett says. My husband was licensed to capture and move snakes that had lost their habitat. He was going to transfer those rattlers, and then She pauses for a minute, and Ben knows she's thinking about her husband dying. She takes a deep breath and goes on. I should have done something with them. Now who knows what happened? Maybe there's a hole in the cage. They got out somehow. Maybe someone stole them, Ben says. That's hard to imagine. No one knew they were there. Oh, what have I done? You didn't do anything, Ben says. Yes, I did. I kept them and I shouldn't have. Will they be all right? I don't know. The teacher's voice sounds so sad that Ben's throat tightens. It's too early in the year for them to be out, and they usually can't adapt to a new habitat. This is all my fault. Maybe they'll be okay, Ben says, trying to cheer her up, and himself. Thanks. Then, before Ben can hang up, she asks, Is your mother there? Ben freezes. Why does she want my mom? Yeah, he stammers. May I speak with her? Ben feels sick. Sure, just a minute. He calls his mom. Who is it? She asks. It's Mrs. Tibbets. He hands her the phone and walks away, but as soon as he's around the corner, he stops to listen. His mother says hello and then falls silent. She's quiet for a long time. He sticks his head around the corner and sees her just standing there with the phone to her ear. Are you sure? She says. Then, after a pause, she talks for a while, saying how much Ben has always liked the outdoors and wild things, and how she appreciates Mrs. Tibbet's concern. She hangs up and sees Ben watching. I wish you'd told us about those snakes, she says. Ben nods. If his mom asks him whether or not he let them out, he knows he'll have to tell her the truth. Well, she says, I'm relieved you didn't have anything to do with it. She sounded very upset. His mom heads back to the kitchen. Ben stands there. He missed his chance to tell the truth, to let the truth come out. Sinking deeper and deeper into a hole, he feels worse than ever. He goes back to his desk and stares at the blank wall. The desert is 2 million miles away now. When he closes his eyes, he sees the snakes. He wonders where they are tonight. Ben does his best to avoid Mrs. Tibbets in school that week and the next. When he's in her class, he does his work but doesn't raise his hand. Twice, she asks him after class if he's managed to catch a peeper or if he wants to come check the vernal pool again. Both times, he shakes his head and hurries out of the room. It's not like he's lost interest in the toads, though. He spends a lot of his time in the woods behind his house. His parents must notice because one day his father comes home with a new pair of waders. This is to save your sneakers, he said. They fit him better than the ones he used at Mrs. Tibbet's house, and he likes the feeling of being waterproof. Using the net Mrs. Tibbets gave him, Ben stares a few American toads, but he still doesn't manage to catch another peeper. He decides to keep one of the toads, and with the money he saved, he buys a terrarium from the pet store. After fixing it up with some mud and a couple of plants, Ben settles the toad in its new habitat. The following Thursday afternoon, Ben is sitting at his desk at home, trying to get started on his geography project. His mom had laid down the law. No more wandering into the woods until he's made progress on his report. His sister is always playing with Rory, Ryan's sister. The house is quiet. He has no excuse for putting off this any longer. He stares at the report guidelines. He picks up a pencil and tapes it onto the notebook. He loves the desert. Why can't he get started on his report? Frustrated, he looks around the room until his gaze comes to rest on a book about amphibians he brought home from the school library. He picks it up and starts leafing through it. He glances over at the terrarium. The toad is crouched in the corner. It doesn't look happy. 4 glass walls and some dirt and plants don't make much of a home for something that's used to living outside in the wild. He skims through the section of the book on building a terrarium for amphibians, looking for ideas. Just then, the doorbell rings. I'll get it, he yells, slamming the book shut. He runs down the hallway to the front door, happy for an excuse to escape his homework. He opens the door and finds his sister Agatha standing there. Ryan is just behind her, holding a book in his hands. The door was locked, you bozo, Agatha says and shoves past him. Was not. Try turning the knob for once. Ben turns back to Ryan. Hi, he says. Hi, Ryan says. Mom and Rory are waiting in the car, so I can't stay. I brought your book back. And when I was at the library, I found these books about amphibians and reptiles too. I thought you might want to see them. He's so excited he practically throws the books at Ben and they fall to the floor between them. Whoops, he says, and scrambles to pick them up. I took them out on my library card, and my mom said we could bring them over. You can give them back to me when you're done. Ben helps Ryan with the books, and Ryan just keeps on talking. They're not as cool as your book. Your book is the best. I've read some of the chapters twice already, and Ryan's mother honks the horn and waves for Ryan to hurry. Sorry, gotta go. Thanks, Ben says. Ryan smiles at his loopy smile. See you tomorrow, he says. On his way to the car, he turns back and calls out, oh yeah, I put a picture I drew in one of the books. It's for you. Okay, Ben says. He waves goodbye as Ryan's mom backs the car out of the driveway. Ben looks down at the stack of books in his arms. Still standing in the doorway with the door open, he opens the top book. Between the first 2 pages is a colored pencil drawing. It's beautiful, much better than anything Ben had ever done. He didn't know Ryan could draw. It's a picture of a bright orange creature perched on a rock by a stream. Above it, Ryan had written in large block letters, Golden Toad, endangered or extinct, handle with care. Underneath the picture of the toad, Ryan has written an inscription, for Ben, your friend, Ryan. Ben's embarrassed. He hasn't done anything to deserve Ryan's friendship. He's barely even talked to him. He takes the books to his room. He searches through his desk drawer for the tape dispenser and sticks Ryan's picture on the wall above his desk. Then he sits at the desk and looks at the library books Ryan brought. He opens the biggest book first, the one with a glossy color photograph of a bright red frog on the cover. He thumbs through, looking at all of the different species of frogs and toads. Then he stops on a page and stares at the photograph of a small, smooth-skinned, olive-green toad. 2 yellow stripes curve across its back. Its eyes are bright, the edges of the eyes are golden, and the pupils are vertical, up and down, not horizontal like other toads. A diagram shows the projection of the hind feet. They look like little shovels. He reads the caption. Eastern spadefoot, now rare and endangered in several states. It's the toad Mrs. Tibbets told him about, the kind that appears every year in her vernal pool. Compared to some of the other species in the book, it doesn't look like much, but Mrs. Tibbets has made it sound like a treasure, like a special secret that only the 2 of them knew about, an endangered species right around the corner from where he lives. Ben thinks about the toads out there buried under the ground, waiting for the rain. He'd love to see them when they go out for that one night. But that would mean talking to Mrs. Tibbets, and that's something he can't imagine doing, not after what happened with the snakes. His guilt sits as a pit in his stomach like a big cold stone. He reads all there is about the spadefoot, and it only makes him feel worse. Ben, his mother calls, it's time for dinner. He looks at the spadefoot one more time and closes the book. He'll have to work on his report later. That is the end of chapter 9. We'll continue with chapter 10 next week. Like I said, remember that when you are answering the questions for today's close read questions, there is answers that you can draw from chapter 8 and chapter 9. So feel free to use all of those pages as resources. They're both shorter chapters, but make sure that you are thinking along the lines of physically how he is responding, what he is saying in his mind, how he says what he says out loud, those kinds of things. So it's not always like a direct quote that someone speaks all the time. Sometimes it's things that they do or ways that they move or reactions that they have that you can also quote to help support your claim when you are answering questions. Enjoy. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and great job working so hard this week.